Hello, all right, middle school 6th grade English language arts students. It is my pleasure to be back with video lesson number 4. We're going to start diving into a new part of the unit, Out of the Dust. And my suggestion before I start is you listen to these couple announcements that I have. My first one is we are actually moving through the unit at a good pace. My suggestion for those of you who have just maybe started watching these videos is if you have not watched video lesson 1, 2, and 3, make sure you go back to those before you do this, before you watch this lesson and complete the tasks, because everything that we have done before is a build-up to what we're doing now. So you can take 2 days to do one video, and that is completely fine. Then you will be well on your way to catching up and being up to where we are. So my other thing is I have had the pleasure of getting in touch with quite a few of you all through Talking Points. I want to encourage more of you to reach out to me through Talking Points, and if you decide to, my question that I have for you is what are you doing to have fun? What is it that you're doing during quarantine to make sure that you are having fun? If, like I said, you haven't reached out to me yet, then answer that question. Reach out to me and let me know. If you're curious enough, you can also ask what I'm doing to have fun, and I'll be more than happy to share that with you. For this lesson, we're going to need 5 sheets of notebook paper. Make sure you have those ready to go. If you do not have notebook paper at home, you can use any blank sheet of paper that you have. It could be paper that you use for like blank sheets of paper that you use to draw, whatever it is. As long as they're blank, and we can work with those. So let's get started. The last lesson we wrapped up, we were able to finish reading Spring 1935, and we also discussed various themes of the novel. For example, with the poem The Visit, we were able to understand that the theme was whenever you lose something that you value, it most likely will remain with you. You will always have it in some form or another. We also said another theme, right, could be you will always miss what you love, such as Mad Dog will miss the land when he leaves. With the poem called Hope, you may have gathered that a theme it is important to have hope during difficult times. Another theme could be hope comes in very different ways. In this case, it comes in the form of rain. You can also have gathered the theme that hope is a powerful force. Many themes were talked about and discussed through the whole chapter Spring 1935. Today, we are going to explore the life of the migrant through informational text, poetry, photography, and audio interview. We're going to write a description of migrant life as well. For this, we will need a copy of Out of the Dust, which, do not worry, I will provide for you. You will also need Migrant Mother, which is this set of pictures. You will need Okies from Farming in the 1930s, is this article, and your reading log, which is just your 5 sheets of notebook paper. We're going to start by rereading Migrants. We're going to answer the questions in our reading log. What does this poem tell us about people who leave the Dust Bowl? Right? Migrants, people who leave. How would you describe the tone of this poem? We're going to focus on these questions. The way I would like for you to set up your reading log is by doing split notes. So create split notes. Remember, split notes looks a little bit like this. You have on the left side a narrower column, and on the right you have a wider column, right? Created by this line, this vertical line, and we call it split notes. I want you to title it Poem, Migrants. And on the left side, on the main idea side, where we write main idea, remember that the right-hand side is details. On the main idea, write, what does this poem tell us about people who leave the Dust Bowl? You also have the second question, how would you describe the tone of this poem? So make sure that your split notes are set up this way. Right beside each question you will write your answer. This will be the details. This is the main idea, the main thing we are focusing our notes on, and the details to that question, to that main idea. Same thing with this one. Okay. Let's read. Migrants. We'll be back when the rain comes, they say, pulling away with all they own, straining the springs of their motor cars. Don't forget us. And so they go, fleeing the blowing dust, fleeing the fields of brown-tipped wheat, barely ankle-high, and sparse as the hair on a dog's belly. We'll be back, they say, pulling away towards Texas, Arkansas, where they can rent a farm, pulling in enough cash, maybe start again. We'll be back when it rains, they say, setting out with their bed springs and mattresses, their cook stoves and dishes, their kitchen tables and their milk goats, tied to their running boards. In rickety cages, setting out for California, where even though they'll say they'll come back, they just might stay if what they hear about that place is true. Don't forget us, they say, but there are so many leaving. How can I remember them all? April 1935. Okay, it's time to answer. On your split notes, go ahead and answer those two questions. What does this poem tell us about people who leave the Dust Bowl, and how would you describe the tone of this poem? Think to yourself, what do they take when they leave? What do they say to the people when they're leaving? Where do they actually go? Where do they intend to go? Does the speaker say, does Billy Joe sound like she believes they will come back? And what is Billy Joe's tone? What does she talk? How is she talking in this poem? What kind of tone is she using? Take time to complete those answers on your split notes. Next, we will read an informational article and take notes in our reading logs about what we are learning. We're going to read Okies from Farming in the 1930s by livinghistoryfarm.org, this article right here. After doing that, and on our notes, we're going to think about this question: how has the information in this article added to or changed your understanding of migrant life? What surprised you? What information is new to you? Similarly to before, I want you to set up your split notes, this time with the title at the top being Article, Okies, and on the side, because you're going to be answering those two questions about what information is new to you and what surprised you, let's go ahead and for our main idea headings, use new info and surprised me, right? It's a way that we can actually paraphrase our question, new info and surprised me. We're going to answer on the right-hand side. Let's read, and as we read, I want you to consider, what are you learning that you didn't know before? Why were the migrants called Okies, and did they find what they were looking for? Okies. As the double whammy of drought and depression deepened on the Great Plains, more and more farmers gave up and were forced off of their land. In addition, the relentless march of new tractors meant that the farmers who were able to scrape together enough money to buy a tractor could buy out their neighbors. Fewer farmers could farm more land. But where would those who left go? So many went to cities. Some went to cities, but many decided to head west. In fact, during the 30s, hundreds of thousands left the plains for the west coast. So many migrated from Oklahoma that they were dubbed Okies in the popular press. For years, California, Oregon, and Washington had been growing. Many who were pushed off of their plains were pulled west because they had relatives who had moved to the coastal areas. And the boosters of California had advertised that the state offered a perfect climate and an abundance of work in the agricultural industry. Florence Thompson says she was one of the Okies. She and her family had left Oklahoma in 1925, before the Depression. The 30s made their situation worse. She and the family were following the migrant trail, moving from place to place as crops became ready for harvest. It was very hard and cheap, Florence said. We just existed. We survived, let's put it that way. California, the state that had once advertised for more migrant workers, found themselves overwhelmed by up to 7,000 new migrants a month, more migrants than they needed. So for several months in 1936, the Los Angeles Police Department sent 136 deputies to the state lines to turn back migrants who didn't have any money. Bordering states like Arizona were angry that California was trying to, quote-unquote, dump hobos back on them. Eventually, the police were returned to Los Angeles, but the migrants kept coming. There was some work, especially in the new fields of cotton that were being planted in California, a crop that Southern Plains people knew a lot about. But there was not enough work for everyone who came. Instead of immediate riches, they often found squalor in roadside ditch encampments. Delbert and Alvin Appetz knew several families who left for California. The plight of the Okies and other plains migrants caught the sympathy of people across the country. In part, this was because these migrants were white, in contrast to the Mexican and Filipino workers who supplied the quote-unquote factory farms with the seasonal labor needed before and after Okies arrived. The Okies also came in family groups and were in desperate straits, living in tents or out of the back of a car or truck. Photographs were taken of the migrants from the Great Plains and published around the world. John Steinbeck visited a migrant camp in California and wrote a magnificent piece of fiction, The Grapes of Wrath, which still sells millions of copies today. Florence Thompson says she and many others lived the life that Steinbeck dramatized. Their story is part of a larger story of migration into and out of the plains during the 30s. Now that we've read the article, go ahead and complete. What new information did you learn about migrants, and what surprised you about the life that these migrants faced? Next, we will examine photographs taken by Dorothea Lange. Look closely at the photographs, take notes in your reading logs about what you are seeing. We're going to look closely for anything that surprises you, that adds to or contradicts your understanding of migrant life, just like we did before. This photograph, for example, is titled Migrant Mother. Why? Why do you think it's titled that way? Set up your notes this way, titled Photos, quote-unquote, Migrant Mother, and New Info on the main idea side, and Surprised Me, also on the main idea side, just like this. Let's start with this photograph, titled Migrant Mother. I want you to look closely at it, and I want you to ask yourself, what additional information about migrants can you add to your notes? Go ahead and take this moment to add to your notes. Really analyze carefully this image. Take a look. What is it that surprises you? What is new about migrants? What new information about migrants can you gather from this picture? Pause the video, like I said, if you need to. Now that you've done that, listen as I read to you a quick description of this photograph. The photograph that has become known as Migrant Mother is one of a series of photographs that Dorothea Lange made of Florence Owens Thompson and her children in February or March of 1936 in Nipomo, California. Lange was concluding a month's trip photographing migratory farm labor around the state for what was then the Resettlement Administration. In 1960, Lange gave this account of the experience. Quote, "I saw and approached the hungry and desperate mother as if drawn by a magnet. I do not remember how I explained my presence or my camera to her, but I do remember she asked me no questions. I made 5 exposures, working closer and closer from the same direction. I did not ask her name or her history. She told me her age, that she was 32. She said that they had been living on frozen vegetables from the surrounding fields and birds that the children killed. She had just sold the tires from her car to buy food. There she sat in that lean-to tent with her children huddled around her and seemed to know that my pictures might help her. And so she helped me. There was a sort of equality about it." End quote. Here is another image. Take notes about what it tells you. Take notes about what you are seeing in the photographs, what strikes you or surprises you about what you are seeing. Look for details. What do they tell you? What conclusions about migrant life can you draw from what you are seeing? Take a moment to add to your notes. Now that you've done that, listen as I read to you this caption. Nipomo, California, March 1936. Migrant agricultural workers family. 7 hungry children. Mother aged 32. The father is a native Californian. Destitute is a pea pickers camp because of the failure of the early pea crop. These people had just sold their tent in order to buy food. Most of the 2,000 people in this camp were destitute. Destitute, a new word for probably a few of us. This word means of substance. It talks about without means of substance. It means lacking clothing, food, and shelter. That's what destitute means. People in this camp were destitute. They lacked those things. If you learned something new, go ahead and add that to your notes before we move on to the next photograph. All right, here is another image. What does it tell you? It's different than the previous one. Take a look. Analyze it very closely. What does it tell you? What new information can you gather about migrant life? And What surprises you? Look for those details. Once you've added to your notes, we will be ready for the next and last image, actually. Here is the last image. Look very, very closely at it. And once again, add to your notes. What are you seeing in the photograph? What strikes you or surprises you about what you're seeing? How does this photograph differ from the previous ones? Look for details. What do they tell you? What conclusions about migrant life can you draw about what you are seeing? So many things in this picture, so many things that you can use to make conclusions about migrant life. Next, we will listen to the interview with Florence Thompson on, not actually this website, but on YouTube. And we're going to ask ourselves, again, the same question. How has the information in this article added to or changed your understanding of migrant life? It actually is supposed to say in this audio. What surprised you? What information is new to you? For this one, all I want you to do is title it audio. It's again keeping the main ideas as new info and surprised me.
I left Oklahoma in 1925 and went to Orville. That's where them three girls whose dad died was in Orville, 1931. And I was 28 years old, and I had 5 kids, and that one was on the road. She never even saw her daddy. She was born after he died. It was very hard. And cheap. I picked cotton in Fireball when that girl there was about 2 years old. I picked cotton in Fireball for 50 cents a hundred.
100 weight.
100 pounds.
How much did you pick in a day then?
I generally picked around 450, 500. I didn't even weigh 100 pounds. I lived down there in Shafton, and I'd leave home before daylight and come in after dark. It just existed. You know, any way we lived, we survived. Let's put it that way. I walked from what they call a Hoover campground right there at the bridge. I walked from there to way down on 1st Street and worked at a penny a dish down there for 50 cents a day and the leftovers. You know, they gave me what was left over to take home with me. Sometimes I'd carry home 2 water buckets full. Well, we started from ELA to Watsonville.
Mm-hmm.
And the timing chain broke on my car, and I had a guy to put it in this pecan in Lapoma. I started to cook dinner for my kids, and all the little kids around the tent come in, can I have a bite, can I have a bite? But they was hungry, them people was. And I got my car fixed, and I was just getting ready to pull out when she come back and snapped my picture. I come to this town in 1945. I transferred from Whittier State to Modesto. And when this hospital opened up out here, I went to work there. And the first 8 years I lived in this town, I worked 16 hours out of 24, 8.5 years, 7 days a week.
Are you comfortable now?
Yeah.
Now that you have listened to that brief audio interview, I want you to take the time to answer on your reading log or on your pieces of notebook paper what surprised you and what information is new to you. What did you learn that was new that you can add to your notes about migrant life? Pause the video and complete that part. Having successfully looked at 4 different sources, the poem, our article, the
photographs and the interview, we can now move on to our exit ticket. I want you to imagine that you are a migrant who has left the Dust Bowl, left Oklahoma, and you have to write a letter home to someone you left behind. It could be your mom, it could be your father, it could be grandparents. Remember that you can feel free to use your imagination, but I want you to include details from your notes. Okay, include details from your notes. When you complete your exit ticket, important things to keep in mind or to help you and guide you in your reading are to consider who is it that you are? Who are you going to play the role of in this letter? What perspective are you writing from? And what is your experience in the Dust Bowl? Why did you leave?
So, like I said, I want you to use your notes for this exit ticket. In your letter, include details that you learned from all these 4 sources. For example, in the poem, we learn that people are loading up their vehicles, right? They are taking their belongings, not only their belongings, but their animals as well. They say, "Don't forget us," but people like Billy Joe have no reason to believe that they'll come back. They think, Billy Joe, for example, thinks that they will stay and they'll find someplace better to live. Billy Joe, right? She's kind of sad when she's talking about these migrants leaving. Seems like she's afraid that they're not going to be back after all, and that she might not even remember them. Then there's also the article. The article teaches us how people are moving west. It teaches us that states like California, which we've heard of before, but new to us is the information that Oregon and Washington, which are states close to California, are also growing. Many people are moving there. We learn that many of the migrants are from Oklahoma, so that's why they are they're called Okies. And we learned that there wasn't enough work for all the migrants. That article tells us that. It also tells us that instead of immediate riches, these people were actually they actually found squalor on roadside ditch encampments. They didn't find luxury. We learned that because a lot of them were white and they were desperate for food and shelter, a lot of Americans tended to feel sorry for them, right? That's something we hadn't considered before. Most of these people were white, so they were able to gain that empathy, whereas maybe other people had it more difficult, people of color. We're going to, we also looked at the photographs. Photographs tell us even more than even new information that we had not considered before. For example, we learned that through a photograph that there are people traveling with babies, there are people traveling with multiple children, that some of them, in the case of this mother, it appears, is probably not getting the nutrients she needs. She's quite thin. Her hair looks like might need washing. The children's clothing looks dirty, looks tattered. People, they aren't really looking at the camera. The mother isn't looking at the camera, as if she doesn't seem to be bothered by it at all. Right? You wonder kind of why that is. We can conclude from that first photograph especially that migrants really don't have enough to eat, that they don't have easy access to water, to bathe or wash their clothes. There's the next picture, the next image. That next image shows an old looking lamp. If you noticed it, using our prior knowledge, that lamp probably ran on kerosene. We can also see that there are what looks like a dirty tarp or a tent. It looks like it's being held by a branch. Mother is holding a baby who's sleeping. The child's clothing, as I said before, they look dirty and they look ragged. There's no one looking at the camera. We can conclude from that picture, that second picture, migrants are living in makeshift tents. They have probably no money at all. They are living where they don't have any electricity. That next picture adds to our knowledge about migrant life by showing us a table in the foreground. There's an empty plate on it. You kind of wonder, is that where they eat? That plate looks quite dirty. People are living in makeshift tents. We conclude from that picture for sure, and that they have no money to survive. There is also the last picture I showed, where you can really see that they are in sort of a makeshift tent. There is a trunk with a few things in it. You begin to question, where are the men? And you conclude that they might be dying of starvation. You conclude how a lot of people get to a point where they get to be extremely thin and skinny, and how they might be questioning whether they should have left their homes, or maybe if they knew that this was going to happen to them, they might have not considered leaving. Then there's also the audio. The audio teaches us and kind of clarifies some things. We learned that the lady in the photograph, that mother, that her husband has passed away before the photo was taken, and he died before the baby in the photo was born, she tells us. She then, it seems that Florence wasn't really living in the makeshift tent. She was waiting for her car to be fixed. She clarifies that part. Some people may have been living in tents. She wasn't in this case. It also says she cooked for her family, right? We learned she cooked for her family, and she also gave some to hungry people that were around her. She worked picking cotton, got paid 50 cents. She would pick 450 to 500 pounds of cotton a day. She got to take leftover food to her family sometimes when she got paid 50 cents a day. And she says that she used to work 16 hours a day. That is a lot of time. And we can conclude from just that there must have been people who were worse off than her, because she is able to feed them. There's also, we learned that women are doing jobs like picking cotton, and that women without husbands had to work to feed their children. That was their only choice. Things like that I want you to include in your exit ticket.
Having completed your exit ticket, we are done with the lesson. In this lesson, you would have examined migrant life from 4 different sources, and you would have also completed a letter to describe migrant life. If you got through the whole lesson, congratulations, and I will see you for video lesson number 5 next week. I hope that you are doing very well and that you choose to reach out to me through talking points. I cannot wait to hear from you. Bye-bye.